Thank you for tuning into the second episode of Shorewood Public Library's podcast, The Shorewood Stacks. I'm Lisa Quintero, Young Adult Librarian.
Hi, I'm Nick Barron. I'm a Shorewood patron and an occasional program organizer.
In this podcast, we'll be discussing library news, what we've been reading, listening to, or watching, upcoming virtual events, and more. Library news. First off, I'd like to apologize for an error in last week's episode. I said that the library would be reopening on May 24th instead of May 4th. Originally, I think I was thinking about the governor's original order, which was supposed to end on April 24th, so I got a little mixed up. But the governor has extended the Wisconsin Safer at Home order until May 26th now, so our opening date won't be May 4th or May 24th, and we are currently working out exactly when that will be. We will keep everybody up to date through all of our communication channels with our new opening date as soon as we've determined it, so keep an eye out. Curbside pickup is coming soon, though, which is very exciting. We are working out the details, and we will be sharing more information on that soon, too. National Library Week starts on April 19th, which is this Sunday, and we'd like to hear from our listeners. Tell us what you miss about the library, or share your favorite library story, and we'll share them on next week's episode to wrap up National Library Week. You can send your comments and stories to shorewoodstacks@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook at Shorewood Public Library, Twitter at ShorewoodLib, our website, shorewoodlibrary.org, and on Podbean at shorewoodstacks.podbean.com.
So Lisa, before we get into what you've been reading, what have you been up to in the last week?
Well, I learned how to edit and do all of this podcast stuff. I'd never done a podcast before, so I got online and did a webinar on how to promote your podcast and how to share it on iTunes and Spotify and do all that sort of stuff, and I'm very excited to be able to do this. I also ordered myself a pair of roller skates. I haven't roller skated since I was 10, and that was over 20 years ago, so I am looking forward to learning how to roller skate again while we shelter in place, because gotta stay active, you know? How about you, Nick?
I'm looking forward to seeing that, too.
Oh, you are, huh? What have you been doing? What did you learn in the last week or so?
So, in the last couple of weeks, I'm going to preface this by saying that I love tabletop games. And most of the programming that I've done at Shorewood Library has involved tabletop games. But part of the joy of tabletop games is actually sitting in front of people and having an experience together. And so I started learning about a bunch of different platforms that allow you to have a tabletop game experience, but virtually. And so in the last few weeks, I was learning about Discord and a variety of other platforms that allow for voice chat and sharing images and what have you. And I actually ran my first two sessions of an RPG, a role-playing game, and they both went fantastically well. And it was really nice to connect with people. I ended up running games for old friends that I hadn't seen in years that were on opposing coasts of the United States, and even had a friend from the UK participate as well. And so, learning how to use these platforms has been fantastic, and it gave me an experience that I may not have participated in if this situation hadn't happened. So,
yeah, no, it's neat how we've found ways to connect with people who, live out of state or who we might not connect with as often, and how we're finding new ways to connect. From the stacks. So, what have you been reading this week, Nick?
So last week I said that this week I intended to finish reading or listen to the Beastie Boys book. And I ended up deciding to download the Beastie Boys book on Libby. And rather than, I was already 300 pages into the book. And I made the decision to start over from the beginning listening to the audiobook. And I didn't quite succeed in getting all the way through the book since I started over, but I've only got like 90 pages to go. But it turns out that there are things that I like about both formats. The book is written the same way that they make albums, like a mixtape. The Beastie Boys love music, all music, so this only makes sense. Their albums would have hip-hop that pulled from rock and funk and jazz, and they throw in punk songs, commercials, and answering machine messages. The book and audiobook are crammed with short anecdotes, alternating narrators and perspectives, and out of left field asides like playlists, arguments over facts, which is really funny. And they even have a chapter of recipes. That wasn't my favorite, but it's there. I had to laugh when the audiobook reached the sticking to themes, 15 photos by Spike Jonze. They actually had Spike Jonze describe the photos and then read the captions. It so genuinely captures just their ridiculous sense of humor. So,
can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I know that you were listening to it, and I was overhearing some of it since we share the same household. And there was a story about, was it a business that had a recording that was on a message that they ended up buying the recording?
Yeah. So this is a ridiculous anecdote. So their second LP is called Paul's Boutique, and Paul's Boutique ended up shutting down like 6 months after they put out the record. Paul's Boutique was an actual place in New York that had these ridiculous commercials that they thought were funny. And so they named the record Paul's Boutique. The record comes out, not connected to them having put out the record. The place just, didn't survive and it shut down. And so MCA ends up deciding that he is going to go through the trouble, even though they lived in LA at the time, of buying or acquiring the phone number for Paul's Boutique. And being that he was in LA and this is the 90s and you didn't share phone numbers like that, like you can now, he actually acquired the phone number and then had that phone number routed to an answering machine in his parents' basement. And he put different messages on that answering machine, and people would call Paul's Boutique and they would get this answering machine in his parents' basement. And they ended up, over time, the messages, people would leave messages, and one of those messages actually is on Check Your Head. But it's really just a ridiculous thing, and it just shows their ridiculous sense of humor. But apparently they also had a problem where people were like leaving like weird and creepy messages. And so periodically MCA would go home to visit his parents, and he would shut the machine off and put it away for 6 months. And then he'd be like, okay, everything's fine now. And he'd plug it back in, and then the messages would keep coming in. And so this went on for years before he finally unplugged it completely.
Yeah, I remember hearing that story and thinking that was really, really interesting and entertaining. And also, who thinks to do that, to just, buy somebody's message and the phone number to do what they did.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So for those who don't remember who the Beastie Boys were, they were the band that wrote that song, You've Got to Fight for Your Right to Party.
Also intergalactic.
But the one that most people probably remember is You Got to Fight for the Right to Party. And they went from being these young punk rock kids who had a lot of feelings about rock stars and bro culture, and then somehow in a span of a few years they morphed into everything that they hated, and they became these poster boys for bro culture. So they go through the process in the book of showing how they grew, and anybody that listened to their music for years to come, saw that progression in how they grew. But they grew up, and really the book does a really good job of showing how they evolved as people. So the book is a fantastic journey through their musical history, but they make a point to repeatedly disavow their bro days. Fans of the band know that they did this in songs like Sure Shot, which was on Ill Communication, and Song for the Man, which was on Hello Nasty. But for those picking this up and they thought, oh, this was that band that wrote that funny song that I thought was cool in middle school, or yeah, these guys are idiots, they go way out of their way to apologize. Okay, so in the spirit of the Beastie Boys, I'm going to go on a little aside of my own. So one of the chapters, the book goes over each of the different albums that they released, and they talk a little bit about each of the records. And one of the records that, one of the chapters, I should say, that is in the book is about Ad Rock and his feelings on Hello Nasty, which is his personal favorite record. In fact, the chapter breaks down why it should be my favorite record or your favorite record, which is a funny way to approach it. But
they shouldn't be deciding what's your favorite record.
But Ad Rock is biased on that, and I'm going to explain why. So, and I'm going to also tell you about my favorite record, Check Your Head. So, when the Beastie Boys formed, they were actually a punk band that started in New York City, and they put out a couple of self-released records or records released by tiny labels that were owned by like record store owners and what have you. And so these were not their hip hop records. The record that most people know is License to Ill. License to Ill was the song they had, Fight for Your Right to Party. They were still basically teenagers at the time. And that record was them, but they had two producers. They had Rick Rubin and Russell Simmons, and those two producers really kind of steered the direction that they went in. They chose a lot of the beats and really whispered in their ear on a lot of things, or just told them, this is what you're doing. And they were young dudes, so they just kind of rolled with it. Oh, this is fun. And so they realized after Licensed to Ill that they wanted to kind of strike out on their own, and they moved to LA and they did a record called Paul's Boutique, and they did that record with this duo called the Dust Brothers. And this is considered, Paul's Boutique is their most critically acclaimed record. And the reason being is largely because of the Dust Brothers and their amazing skills at creating beats out of samples from other songs. But at its heart, Paul's Boutique is as much the Dust Brothers as it is them. So the record that they put out after that was Check Your Head. And Check Your Head was a record where they all, the three of them, they rented their own studio space. They put in a basketball court and a half pipe, a skate ramp, so that they could just live and breathe music and hanging out every single day. And so this record really kind of captures that youthful enthusiasm without all of the broness. And it was just them just living and breathing music every day. Cut ahead to Hello Nasty, which is Ad Rock's favorite record. And I remember reading about Hello Nasty at the time, and Ad Rock really, whereas Check Your Head was this record of oneness, of them all working together and being together all the time. Hello Nasty was a record where they kind of did all of the stuff separately, because at that point they had already started to have kids, and they were back living in New York City. And Ad Rock talks about how he spent a lot of time just hanging out in the studio by himself and creating beats and what have you. And I remember reading about this at the time that it came out, that really a lot of what Hello Nasty was Ad Rock creating a bunch of stuff, and then the other guys coming in and showing up and being like, oh, you know, that's cool. And then they add some stuff, and then that's how they built the record. But it wasn't this same like organic, all being together, holding instruments, writing and playing parts. It was more of a person writing something in complete isolation and then presenting it to or not even presenting it to the other guys. They just show up in the studio the next day by themselves and listen to it, and then they would add a couple of things. And so they're two very different writing experiences, and I think Ad Rock is biased. This is my firm opinion, is that Ad Rock is biased because Hello Nasty is really mostly him. And so it's his favorite record, but it's his favorite record because I think he had the greatest influence in it, and it is his proudest achievement. Doesn't say that in the book, but I think it's his proudest achievement because it was so much of him, as opposed to Check Your Head, which is just this fantastic organic record.
Cool. Yeah, so you were listening to a bunch of the records this week, and I know that you don't actually, own all of them. So how are you listening to them?
Yes. So I'm going to talk about two different library platforms. So the audiobook I listen to on Libby, but Hoopla is another library platform that you have access to with your library card that has music and movies.
It also has books.
It has books as well, but strangely, it has almost the entire Beastie Boys catalog, but it does not have the Beastie Boys book.
Okay.
So The only record that was conspicuously missing to me was a record called Aglio e Olio, which is my second favorite Beastie Boys record. But yeah, all of the known greats, Paul's Boutique, License to Ill, Hello Nasty, Ill Communication, and Check Your Head.
They're on there. Cool.
They're all on there.
So yeah, so if you want to listen to any of these while you yourself are reading the Beastie Boys book or listening to it on Libby, you should check the albums out on Hoopla. Last I heard, we still have 8 checkouts limit for the month of April, and that has also been extended to the month of May since we will still be sheltering in place for the month of May. So what are you planning on reading next?
All right, so I am a big fan of a writer named Naomi Klein. She wrote a book in the early 2000s or mid-2000s called No Logo, and she followed that with a book called The Shock Doctrine, and I love both of those books. No Logo talked about the rise of brands and the loss of public space, that everything is branded and monetized.
Yeah, I remember reading that one, and I remember it also talked a lot about the textile industry and sweatshop labor and fast fashion and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. And so it was a fantastic book, very eye-opening. And so when she put out The Shock Doctrine, I followed and picked up that book as well and read that. And that was just a very intense page-turner of the history of something that she terms disaster capitalism, where different forces, politicians, corporations, the World Monetary Fund or International Monetary Fund and the World Bank apply pressure and take shocks where there's natural disasters or there's coups or other big things that disorient people and throw a nation into or a region into disarray, and then different financial ideas, economic ideas, often pioneered by Milton Friedman, the economist. The idea of taking these disruptions and using them as an opportunity to, for example, during a hurricane or after Hurricane Katrina, it was an opportunity for politicians and corporations to privatize education in New Orleans in the wake of this great tragedy. And so she really documents this happening all over the world over the course of 40 years. So Naomi Klein recently released a book called No Is Not Enough, and it expands upon her theory of shocks and the shock doctrine and applies them to the political climate that is happening now or in the last couple of years, talking about how Trump keeps people and the media and everything in this constant state of confusion and disarray. But it's not just Trump. She talks about Modi and Erdogan and all of these different nationalist leaders in different countries, and how they utilize, these shocks in order to implement things and shift the political environment and political and economic discussion. And so, I'm really excited to read this book because it is not just about those things happening, but also ways to also kind of subvert the paradigm that they create and use these as opportunities to also find hope and resistance.
Yeah, I know she's been doing a lot of talks recently. I know that you and I have watched a couple about how the shock doctrine might come into play with COVID-19 things around the world, both here in the United States and everywhere else, and how some things are already starting to happen, where things are becoming privatized or governments are, overstepping bounds. And so, yeah, it does sound really interesting. And I have not read the shock doctrine yet, and I know you've talked about it before to me, and I would like to read it, and I'm curious about this one as well.
And I'm listening to that as an audiobook on Hoopla.
Cool. I know that we have a couple of those at the library. I don't know which ones specifically we have in book form, but you can always check the County Cat catalog and see what we've got at Shorewood. So
what about you? What are you reading?
So this week I've been reading Jason Reynolds' book, Look Both Ways. I know last week I said that I was going to read a bunch of books, but you know me. I often think that I'm going to read 5 books in a week, and I only end up reading like 1 or 2. But yeah, Look Both Ways is a children's book by Jason Reynolds. It is a collection of 10 short stories that he wrote in 2 weeks, he said, at least the first draft. And they are all stories about kids and what happens to them on their journey home from school. He talked about in an interview about how that 15 minutes after school is like one of the only times that as kids we have of complete freedom when we're either walking home or riding the bus home. And it's like the only time that we have alone with our friends outside of adult supervision for the most part. So he created all these stories about different groups of kids leaving the same school and going home. And the stories can be read in any order. They don't have to be read in the order that they are in the book, except for the very last one has to be read last.
So do you have a favorite story?
There's quite a few in here that I enjoy a lot, but there are 1 or 2 that really stick out to me. I think my favorite is probably The Low Cuts, which Jason Reynolds said on his Instagram live feed this week is a lot of people's favorite. The Low Cuts is a story about a bunch of kids who all have parents who have cancer, and they all met in a support group at school. And every day after school, the Low Cuts go around stealing money from teachers, from their classmates, from businesses. And, they seem kind of like these miscreants at first. And you're reading the story and you're like, what are these kids all about? And they're kind of mean to other kids because they're taking their, lunch money and things like that. And as the story progresses, you find out that they're taking all this money so that they can go buy candy from the lady who sells candy on their block after school. And they have 90 cents between all 4 of them by the time the school day is over. And so with that 90 cents, they buy a bunch of penny candy from this woman. And then they take the penny candy from the woman and they do a bunch of mathematical calculations and figure out that they can sell these candies in bundles to other people. And so they go to a pool hall where they sell all the candies in bundles to a bunch of older gentlemen. They have things like Mary Janes and Lifesavers, and a lot of the older gentlemen at the pool hall are like, I haven't had Mary Janes in forever, and they're just very excited about their old-fashioned candy. And so the kids sell them these packs of candy that they paid pennies for like, I think $2 or $3. And the adults at first are like, $2 or $3 for 5 pieces of candy, like that's ridiculous. And the kids, say the same thing that the lady who sold them the candy did, which is as time goes on, prices go up. So it's the cost of inflation. And so the pool hall guys, after one buys it, the other ones are not to be outdone. So, they buy the rest of the packs from these kids. And the kids end up leaving the pool hall with $9. And when they leave the pool hall, they say, hurry up, we're going to be late. And as a reader, you're like, what are they going to be late for? And they end up seeing an ice cream truck, and they chase down this ice cream truck because it's starting to pull away from the curb as they're walking up to it. The kids go up to the ice cream truck, and they turn to one kid and are like, what are we getting? And that kid says, we're getting 4 vanilla soft serves. And the ice cream truck man says, with sprinkles? And all the other kids look at the one kid, and the kid nods and says, yeah, with sprinkles. And so they all get their vanilla soft serves with sprinkles. And after the ice cream truck leaves, they pay the ice cream truck guy, I think he says, it's $8, and they give him $9, and he's like, well, here's your $1 back. And they're like, oh, no, keep that, that's for you. And so then they walk back to one of the kids' houses, and when they get there, the kid's mom opens the door and is like, oh, how are you all doing? Like, how was your school day? And, they all say, it was fine, like most kids do when they get home. And the one kid, his name's Bit, he asked his mom, how was chemo today? Because we find out that her cancer was back. And she says, it wasn't so good, and that she's feeling a bit nauseated. And so he says, I figured that might happen. And so he and his friends all said, we brought you ice cream because we thought you might be hungry. And so that story was just very, very heartwarming. And it was just interesting to see the complexities of people, because at the beginning of the story, you think like these kids are like bad kids. They're stealing stuff from other kids and they're doing this, At the end of the story, you're like, they did it for good, and it was really heartwarming. And Jason Reynolds this week has been doing live readings of a bunch of the stories from the book, and I've been listening to a bunch of them, and he's been giving a lot of backstory on the stories, and I didn't know a lot of stuff about him personally, And apparently he said that a lot of these stories are based off of things that happened to him as a child, and that some of the people in that story and in other stories are real people that were in his life. And apparently when he was a child, his parents had cancer, and he was part of a group like this group. And it was just, his stories are just very real and very...
They show that people are complicated?
They do show that people are complicated. They just touch on what childhood is and what it means to grow up and what we experience as we do so. And, they're just very true to life. And, he managed to write these characters who are both innocent and not, and his stories are just great. He obviously leaves me speechless sometimes.
Hey, we'll be able to edit that out. Also, this is going to be a little late, but spoiler warning.
So yeah, beyond that, I also liked his story that he read this week called 5 Things Easier to Do Than Simeon's and Kenzie's Handshake. And that one actually made me really emotional too, because that one, he talked about at the end about how these kids do this very elaborate handshake in the story, and they get in trouble for doing this handshake at school because it's very elaborate and it disrupts class and everything. And at the end of the story, he talked about how the handshake is actually American Sign Language for I hear you even when the rest of the world doesn't. And that just was a really powerful message, especially with what the rest of the story is about. And he talked about a lot of how, Black youth are typecast into the idea of like, when you grow up, you're not going to amount to too much of anything, and a lot of these young boys that are seen as kids as being troublemakers are going to, quote unquote, are going to grow up to be on the front page of the news as a bad headline. And a lot of these stories are about how Black youth are so much more than that, and how our experiences as children are universal in a sense, and how we all get up to shenanigans when we're kids, and we all do dumb things, and we all love to spend time with our friends, and the stories just really show what that's like, especially in middle school, because the stories all take place, they're all from a middle school. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I'm so glad that he read a lot of his stories out loud on Instagram this week. They're very powerful, and he is just an amazing writer.
Very good. So what are you going to be reading next?
So I actually started another book also this week. I started listening to Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning on Libby. Oh, and I forgot to mention the Jason Reynolds book. The library owns a hard copy of it, but it is also available on Libby as both an ebook and audiobook. So it is something that you would have to put on hold because it currently has a waitlist on it, but just wanted to share that. But yeah, so in the always available section, I found Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and it just seemed like a timely read. Frankl was a well-known logotherapist who was interned at concentration camps during World War II, and this book is about his observations of human psychology and how being a prisoner in the camps affected people, and how people who survived were different from people who did not survive, and why, and what, was different about them psychologically. Obviously, there's a lot of difficult subject matter discussed in the book, and he tries to leave out a lot of details because there's been so many accounts of the Holocaust that he feels like there's so much to share the individual atrocities as he is to talk about how people persevered and how they were able to survive. And so it's obviously our current situation is nothing like that, but in a time of uncertainty, in a time of a lot of fear and a lot of sadness, I think a lot of people are struggling, and this book kind of helps people understand the deeper things in life that keep us going, and the things that we shouldn't take for granted, and the things that we should keep in mind as we go day to day, during this time or any other difficult times in our lives. And I think it's a good good reminder of being grateful for the things that we do have.
For sure. Virtual events.
Art Cart Online. We know you miss our weekly Art Cart, and we miss you. Starting Wednesday, April 8th, Ms. Susan will post instructions for fun art projects that you can make at home. Check our calendar and social media pages for instructions every Wednesday. Our website is shorewoodlibrary.org.
Join New York Times bestselling author Kelly Yang on Instagram Live at Kelly Yang HK every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 2 to 2:30 p.m. CST, Central Standard Time, for free online writing classes for teens. Starting this week, several publishers are offering virtual book festivals.
Yeah, we actually created a blog post about this on our website that you can check out at shorewoodlibrary.org. Starting on April 20th, the novel Couch Fest is occurring. Enjoy 5 days of author events, giveaways, and, of course, Team Novel. Follow them on Twitter and Instagram for Couch Fest contests. They will be doing advanced reader copper giveaways and special password promotions from favorite authors. Also starting on April 20th is the WV Reader Fest, and that goes through April 25th, a week-long celebration of books, authors, and readers. Join them on Instagram and Twitter starting Monday for exclusive author chats, chances to win books, and a peek behind the scenes with Wednesday Books editorial and marketing teams. Starting on April 25th, and this is a one-day fest, is the Social Distance Book Fest, a full day of panels featuring authors and booktubers, as well as exciting giveaways and more. Also starting April 25th and going until April 26th is Y'all Stay Home Book Festival, a virtual young adult literature festival featuring giveaways, contests, special events, and 2 full days of panels with 70 best-selling, award-winning authors. Also on April 25th and May 3rd is the Newburyport Literary Festival, which describes itself as a celebration of literature, readers, and writers, featuring readings and discussions of both fiction and nonfiction adult titles. And finally, going from April 30th until May 3rd is the Festival of Literary Diversity, which is taking place in Canada. It is Canada's first festival for diverse authors and storytellers. The Festival of Literary Diversity provides a one-of-a-kind program and event that engage readers, inspire writers, and empower educators by highlighting important and underrepresented voices. For more details on these book fests, visit our library website at shorewoodlibrary.org. If you click on each of the links for the names of the festivals, you can find their schedules and information on how to register for panels and things like that. Some of them are pretty exciting. It looks like they're going to have virtual signings, and the way that works, it sounds like you order your book from a book company that they have a partnership with, and then the authors will sign a book plate and personalize it for you, and then they would mail it to you, which is, an interesting idea to deal with the way that we're doing things right now.
For sure.
And how we're social distancing. So I think it's really cool that they found ways to still have book festivals, because a lot of book festivals got canceled, and this time of year is really big for the book publishing industry, and so it was sad to hear that a lot of them got canceled, but I'm glad that these people are continuing virtually. I'm actually personally very excited for the Social Distance Book Fest, because that one focuses on a lot of young adult literature, as well as the Y'all Stay Home Fest, because once again, I'm the teen librarian, so that's a lot of stuff that I read and enjoy, and I'm also, always trying to find new stuff to share with the teens. And I'm also really interested in the Festival of Literary Diversity that's being hosted in Canada. I was looking at some of the panel discussions that they have, and they look like they'll be very informative. This podcast has been submitted to iTunes and Spotify, and we are currently waiting for approval. If you're a Podbean user, you can subscribe to our channel at shorewoodstacks.podbean.com. If you have any questions or comments for the podcast hosts, email us at shorewoodstacks@gmail.com. In honor of National Library Week next week, we'll be talking to a familiar voice or two, so stay tuned. Until then, thanks for listening, and be well. The Shorewood Stacks is produced by Lisa Quintero and Nick Barron, with music by Kevin MacLeod. The title of this song is Ice Flow, and can be found on incompetech.com.